Eleanor Vance knew the meaning of sacrifice. She had raised her son, Calvin, alone in their small, respectable house in Crestwood, pouring every drop of her physical and emotional strength into his future. After her husband passed, Calvin became the single anchor of her existence. Her hands had been permanently marked by years of scrubbing floors to make ends meet, and her heart had been stretched thin, often choosing to skip meals when money got tight, just so Calvin wouldn't go without. Eleanor had even pawned her most cherished possession, her wedding band, to ensure he had a proper suit for his graduation. She never expected gratitude. She simply operated under the belief that the love she gave would find its way back to her when it truly mattered. The descent into betrayal began quietly, subtly, masked by feigned concern. One Tuesday morning, Eleanor fainted in her kitchen. It was likely just low blood sugar from standing too long on an empty stomach, nothing serious, she thought. But when Calvin rushed over that evening with his wife, Sabrina, their movements were rehearsed and their worry felt manufactured. "Mama, we just want what's best for you," Calvin insisted, while Sabrina nodded in cold agreement. They began the process of what Calvin chillingly called settling my affairs, as though Eleanor were already halfway to the grave. They brought soup, but mostly they asked pointed questions about documents and finances. They frequently mentioned how hard it must be to keep up a house at your age. Eleanor, distracted by the sudden instability of her own health, failed to realize the insidious plot unfolding around her. Behind her back, they had already consulted a lawyer, and Sabrina was spreading rumors among the Crestwood neighbors that Eleanor's mind was slipping mentally. Sabrina even started changing the locks on the doors Eleanor had owned for 4 decades. A week later, the trap was sprung. They invited Eleanor to lunch, claiming it was just a break, a chance to spoil her. Eleanor left without concern. She didn't pack a single bag, she didn't bring her phone charger, and she hadn't even bothered with her good shoes. Instead of a cozy restaurant, they dropped her off at a facility. It was a dreary place, beige walls, plastic flowers, and the scent of disinfectant. "Just for a few days, Eleanor," Calvin smiled, offering a tight, meaningless hug. "Rest up. The nurse will help you get settled." Sabrina placed a cold, lip-glossed kiss on her cheek. Then they walked out the front door and never came back. Eleanor's room at the Silver Pines assisted living facility was impersonal and sterile. There were no familiar pictures, no calendar, and certainly no books, just a rigid bed and a single dresser she hadn't chosen. When she asked the nurse for a phone to call her son, she was told she must wait for visiting hours. "He just left," Eleanor stated, feeling a sharp twist of confusion. The nurse, however, showed her a document, a form detailing her commitment. Eleanor's name was printed clearly, but below it was Calvin's hurried signature. Boxes were checked for medical consent, residential admission, and observation status. He had committed her. Eleanor sat on the edge of that unfamiliar mattress, her hands folded tightly, like she was seeking solace in an empty church. She focused on the cold floor, struggling to suppress a violent tremor, but her body shook anyway. The next morning, Eleanor demanded to speak with the administrator, insisting there had been a terrible mistake. She asserted her competence. She was not senile. She was certainly not dying. The administrator looked at her with pity and disbelief, like I was a ghost asking to come back. "Your son said you're not safe on your own," the administrator explained. "Said you had confusion spells. We were told to expect long-term placement." Eleanor wanted to unleash a deafening scream, to shatter the quiet deception. But a deep instinct warned her that losing control would only validate their lie. So, she waited. For 3 days, she waited in that small, echoing room. On the 4th day, she finally secured access to a house phone. She called Calvin straight to voicemail. She called repeatedly, a desperate litany of ringing. Then she tried Sabrina, her former daughter-in-law, the woman who had cried in Eleanor's kitchen about marital difficulties.
Bang. Blocked.
Staring out the window at the courtyard full of people who had lost their grip on reality, some drooling, some yelling at invisible foes, Eleanor was struck by the horror of her intended end. Is this how I end after everything I gave? She wondered. The answer resonated with chilling certainty. No. That night, she asked the kindly night nurse for a notebook and a pen, claiming she needed to journal. The nurse brought her a small spiral notepad. Eleanor didn't write poetry or prayers. She wrote down facts. She listed dates, transactions, account numbers, contacts, and deeds she still owned. Most importantly, she wrote down the name of her lawyer, Vivian Hall. She wrote her plan down like a blueprint for war. She was mentally capable. She was not confused or delusional. They assumed that because she was old, she wouldn't notice the frozen bank account or the missing name on utility bills. They thought they had buried her early. But Eleanor had endured tougher battles. She had raised a man, survived a challenging marriage, and battled breast cancer. No, I was going to survive this too, she vowed. But survival wasn't enough. She planned to return, and when she did, she wouldn't simply ask for her key back. She would sell the whole property and buy the house next door, just to observe Calvin's face every time he stepped outside, thinking he had won. Vivian Hall, her lawyer, didn't answer the first time. Eleanor didn't blame her. It had been years. But Eleanor left a concise, forceful message. Vivian, this is Eleanor Vance. I believe my son has committed fraud using my name and placed me in a facility against my will. I still have access to the joint account and legal documents. Call me. Vivian called back the next day, her voice startled. Mrs. Vance, are you safe? As safe as a woman can be when her only child locks her away and thinks she won't bite back. Eleanor replied. That Friday, Vivian drove 3 hours through the rain and marched into the Silver Pines facility, identifying herself as Eleanor's attorney. The staff panicked. The manager tried desperately to explain they acted in the client's best interest, but Vivian was relentless. She came into Eleanor's room, briefcase in hand and a fire in her eyes. You're not staying here another week, Vivian declared. And if they give us trouble, we sue them too. It was the first true breath of freedom Eleanor had taken in weeks. They reviewed everything, the forged documents, the power of attorney, POA, Eleanor never signed, and the deed to the house, which still listed only Eleanor's name. Crucially, they discussed the joint account. Calvin believed she had forgotten about it, but Eleanor still maintained access. You want to go nuclear? Vivian asked, a grin forming. Eleanor looked her lawyer dead in the eye.
No.
I want to go biblical. Their strategy was swift and devastating. First, they stripped Calvin of every shred of legal control he thought he held. Vivian filed an emergency motion to revoke the forged POA. They submitted a capacity evaluation, written by the facility's own doctor, who had privately assured Eleanor he saw no signs of dementia. They opened a case against Calvin for elder exploitation and misrepresentation of legal documents. Then, they froze the joint account, the very funds Calvin had been using to pay the mortgage on the house he thought he'd inherited. Eleanor left the nursing home on a Wednesday afternoon. There were no grand farewells, just a bag of new clothes Vivian had purchased and a slow, deliberate walk out the front door. Freedom never smelled so sweet, she realized. They did not return to the house Eleanor had built. She had no desire to. Vivian booked a private suite at an extended-stay hotel for the weekend while they prepared the next, most crucial step. Calvin was still oblivious to her freedom, but that state wouldn't last. Over that weekend, Vivian filed a petition to enforce a partition sale of the property. Since Calvin was living in a home he did not legally own, and Eleanor had never consented to his residency, they had every right to force the property sale. If he refused to vacate, law enforcement would remove him. And because Eleanor remained the sole legal owner, every dime from the sale would be hers. Eleanor pictured Calvin and Sabrina relaxing on her velvet couch, sipping wine they couldn't afford, bragging about swindling a confused old lady. They didn't inherit anything, she thought. They stole it, and now they were going to choke on it. The preliminary hearings moved quickly, taking about a week. The service of papers occurred at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. According to Vivian's private process server, Sabrina shrieked, while Calvin turned ghost white and slammed the door. Eleanor didn't need to witness the scene. Knowing their shock was sufficient. That evening, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She let it ring twice before finally answering. "Mom?" Calvin's voice was strained, almost childlike. "We got something in the mail today. Is this real?" Eleanor didn't answer. "You can't be serious," he continued. "You're going to kick me out of my own house." Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath. "You mean the house you threw me out of?" Silence. "I never signed those documents," she continued, her voice clear and measured. "You forged my name, froze my accounts, and tried to erase me." "That's not what happened," he started to sputter. "I was left in a nursing home with no warning and no clothes," she interrupted, refusing to let him twist the truth. "I was lied to, manipulated, and legally violated." "So yes, Calvin, I'm serious." He tried to shift the blame to his wife. "Mom, listen, Sabrina thought." "I don't care what Sabrina thought," Eleanor snapped. "You're the one I raised, and you let her put me in a box before I was even buried." His voice shook with belated fear. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes," she confirmed. "And you have 30 days to get out." She hung up before he could muster another word. Eleanor slept better that night than she had in months. She and Vivian drank sparkling cider out of paper cups, watching old game shows in their hotel room. It wasn't opulent, but it was hers. Her choice, her moment. The next morning, they met the buyers. A young, newly married couple looking for their first home. They loved the garden, the arched hallway, and the soul of the place. "I think it wants to be filled with love again," the wife said, running her hand along the kitchen counter. Eleanor nodded. "It does." She accepted their full cash offer, closing the deal in less than 2 weeks. Calvin remained silent throughout the process, but Sabrina sent a message on social media. "We're family. I can't believe you're doing this. This was our future." Eleanor stared at the screen, then typed one simple sentence. "No, I was your past, and you buried me too early." Then she blocked her. She felt no tears, no smile, just a profound sense of quiet readiness. She was waiting for moving day, saving the best part of her plan for the absolute last moment. The final walkthrough of her old house was eerie. It was nearly empty, filled only with dust, shadows where furniture used to sit, and the lingering, faint scent of lavender, the oil diffuser fragrance Sabrina always used and that always gave Eleanor a headache. They were gone. Calvin hadn't shown up for the final inspection or fought the court-ordered sale. Sabrina had left behind a box of half-used lotions and a note taped to the fridge. "You'll regret this." Eleanor regretted nothing. The sale closed cleanly and legally. The young couple was overjoyed. With the money from the sale wired into her account, Vivian asked, "Ready for step 2?" Eleanor smiled. "I've been waiting for step 2. The trick to effective retaliation, Eleanor believed, was patience. Revenge should not be delivered hot. It must be cool, deliberate, patient. They waited for Calvin and Sabrina to complete their move out, and they waited for the intense neighborhood gossip to settle. Then, Eleanor did the unthinkable. She purchased the house right next door to the one she had just sold, the house that was now Calvin's official address. It was a cozy, single-story property with a beautiful rose bush out front and a back porch that faced directly toward their kitchen window. She paid in full, with no mortgage. As she signed the final paperwork, the pen trembled slightly in her hand, but not from weakness. It was from the sheer satisfaction of what I was about to do. On the first day of her move, Eleanor wore her best Sunday hat and sat on the front steps, sipping a glass of sweet tea, looking like any ordinary, peaceful grandmother. And then Calvin stepped outside. He was holding a trash bag and a phone, wearing wrinkled gym shorts. He looked worn out, the way a man looks when he suddenly realizes the comfort he enjoys was never truly his to begin with. He froze when he saw her. Eleanor offered a calm, unwavering smile. He quickly retreated back inside. For 4 days, Sabrina avoided eye contact, pulling their curtains tighter and parking her car on the opposite side of the driveway. The audacity of Eleanor's move was too much for her pride to process. But Eleanor wasn't finished with her peaceful warfare. She started planting bright red roses along the fence, blooming like fire. Every morning, She sat on her porch and waved cheerfully to the mailman and chatted with the neighbors whom Calvin and Sabrina had previously ignored. She even baked banana bread for the nice young couple who now lived in her old home. Every evening, she watched Calvin through her blinds as he deliberately tried not to see her. Sabrina's car started leaving earlier and returning later. Calvin stayed inside, the TV flickering through the curtains until 2 a.m. Eleanor could only imagine the destructive sound of their conversations, and she knew her presence was the silent, inescapable cause. One afternoon, her grandson, Lucas, walked down the sidewalk, backpack slung low. He paused hesitantly at the fence line, then crossed over and knocked. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I sit with you a while?" Eleanor didn't press him. She opened the screen and let him in. They sat side by side on the porch, and she poured him iced tea, just as she used to when he was a small boy afraid of thunderstorms. After a silence, Lucas spoke softly. "I heard what they did. I'm sorry." Eleanor remained quiet. "They told me you had dementia," he explained. "Said you weren't safe alone. But you don't look confused to me." Eleanor gave him a soft smile. "I never was." "Why'd you buy the house next door?" he asked, leaning forward. "Because your father needed a reminder," Eleanor said, one he could see from his front porch every single day. Lucas snorted a small laugh. "You're colder than I thought, Grandma." Eleanor laughed fully and honestly. "No, baby. I'm just finished pretending I owe anyone my silence." He stayed for dinner, telling her he missed her sweet potatoes. He lamented that his mother never learned how to properly season anything. Eleanor didn't inquire about Calvin and Sabrina's marriage. Some storms were loud enough to speak for themselves. The next morning, Calvin came to her door. Eleanor did not flinch or stand up. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in his hands like a shamed child. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Doing what?" "Living here, across the street, watching us?" Eleanor tilted her head. "I bought this house because I liked the view." "You're trying to humiliate me," he accused. "No, Calvin," she said, shaking her head. "That part already happened. You did that when you called me a burden."
He looked away.
Eleanor pressed on. "I raised you alone. I carried you through everything. And when I needed help, you left me in a room with strangers and called it mercy. Called it love." "I thought—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You didn't think. You took. You erased. You assumed I wouldn't fight back." He had no rebuttal. Eleanor slowly stood and walked toward the door. "This is my piece, Calvin. Don't knock unless you plan to earn your way back into it." Then she closed the door. She did not cry or tremble. She sat back in her chair and watched the red roses bloom. Closure, she understood, didn't come when someone apologized. Closure came when her peace was so profound it completely drowned out their shame. Calvin stopped speaking to her. He would retrieve the mail or take out the trash, but he never glanced her way. Sabrina, conversely, became passive-aggressively loud. She hosted shrieking garden parties, blasting music, and cackling loudly enough for the sound to carry over the fence. Eleanor could hear her complaining to guests. "She's clearly lonely. She's obsessed with us. She's bitter." Eleanor ignored her. Happy people, she reasoned, never needed to shout about it from the lawn. Then, one Sunday morning, Eleanor looked outside and saw a for sale sign go up in their yard. It was crooked, shoved hastily into the dirt. Calvin stood beside it, arms crossed, his posture rigid. Minutes later, Sabrina stormed out in her robe, pointing, yelling, and pacing. Eleanor watched from her porch, witnessing the self-destruction. Later that week, Lucas came over, now a frequent visitor. He told Eleanor he heard them talking about moving, mentioning Texas. "And your father?" Eleanor asked. "He doesn't want to leave, but he doesn't want to stay here either," Lucas said. "Why not?" Lucas looked up at his grandmother. "Because every time he looks outside, he sees you." Eleanor patted the dirt on the new marigolds they were planting, a subtle smile touching her lips. That night, she pulled out the old spiral notebook, the battle plan she had written in the nursing home. She wrote one final sentence at the bottom of the last page. They thought they buried me. They didn't know I was a seed. Then she closed the notebook for good. 2 weeks later, the for sale sign came down, not because the house had sold, but because Sabrina moved out. Eleanor saw her drive away, trunk overflowing with boxes, mouth pressed into a thin line. She didn't hug Calvin, or even look at him. She drove off as if she couldn't escape fast enough. Calvin sat outside for hours that evening alone. No music, no wine, just him and the echo of everything he had willfully destroyed. Eleanor resisted the urge to go over, to offer the mercy he never granted her. His silence was not her problem to solve. Lucas knocked later that night. She left, he said simply. Didn't even say goodbye. Eleanor made him hot cocoa and let him sit on the couch while the jazz radio played softly. I don't get it, he eventually confessed. They had everything. No, baby, Eleanor corrected him. They took everything. And they built it on lies. That doesn't last. He asked if he could stay the night. Of course, Eleanor said. Anytime. They spent the entire weekend together, cooking and playing cards. Eleanor showed him old photos of his grandfather and shared stories Calvin had never bothered to tell. Lucas genuinely laughed, and Eleanor saw a flicker of goodness in him, a chance to choose a different path. She realized the story had grown beyond revenge. It was about reclaiming something greater, a legacy and a love that wouldn't vanish just because someone deemed it inconvenient. Tucking Lucas into the guest room, he whispered, "You're not a burden, Grandma." Eleanor smiled, tears pricking her eyes. I know, baby. I know that now. With the porch light glowing, Eleanor sat by the window, observing the house next door. It was quiet, dim, and hollow. This is what justice sounds like, she thought. Not rage, not noise, just the hum of peace returning where pain once lived. 3 weeks after Sabrina's departure, the once busy house was a shell. The curtains remained drawn, and Calvin's car sat idle, gathering pollen. Sometimes Eleanor would glimpse him through the window, sitting on the couch in the same wrinkled t-shirt, his eyes vacant. Other times, he'd sit on the steps with a beer, struggling to comprehend how it all slipped through his fingers. He never looked her way, but he didn't need to. He could feel her presence, just as she had once felt the cold absence of his love when she was locked away. Lucas had practically moved in, finding light and life in Eleanor's home. He helped in the garden and kitchen, asking Eleanor questions about family history that Calvin had ignored. One Sunday, Calvin finally came to her porch again. The aroma of sweet potato pie baking had probably drawn him out. He stood there, hesitant, before finally knocking. Eleanor wiped her hands on a towel and stepped outside, not inviting him in. He looked exhausted. I wanted to talk, he said, staring at the floor. Sabrina's not coming back. Eleanor said nothing. I messed up, Mama. The words dropped like bricks. He looked up and Eleanor saw the small, broken boy she had once known hiding behind his defeated eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I got scared. I didn't want to lose everything trying to take care of you. You didn't take care of me, Eleanor stated, quiet but razor-sharp. You got rid of me. He nodded slowly, guilt overwhelming him. I was wrong. And now? Eleanor prompted. I don't expect anything, he whispered. I just wanted to say it. Eleanor took a deep breath. You thought you could bury me, Calvin, she said. But you didn't know what I had left in me. You forgot what I gave up to build that house, to raise you, to keep your lights on, to put food on your table. I didn't forget, he insisted. I tried to rewrite the ending. And I was wrong. Eleanor gave one sharp nod. Lucas is safe with me. He can stay as long as he needs. But you've got some soul-searching to do, and you won't do it on this porch. She turned and returned inside. Peace once reclaimed is not something you ever surrender again, she thought. Calvin stayed in the neighborhood. Maybe it was guilt or shame, or perhaps he hoped proximity would allow him to fix it. But Eleanor wanted distance with meaning. She maintained strict boundaries, keeping their brief interactions polite and controlled. Lucas settled completely into their rhythm, calling Eleanor's house our place. He joined a gardening club and asked if they could grow tomatoes. Of course we could, Eleanor told him. We could grow whatever we wanted because no one was going to uproot us again. One morning, Vivian sent a certified letter. Inside was the final draft of Eleanor's will, fully notarized. Calvin got nothing. The house Eleanor now lived in was willed to Lucas when he turned 21, along with a trust fund for his education. The rest of her estate, all the profits from the house sale, retirement savings, and insurance money, would establish the Vance Legacy Grant. This fund was dedicated to helping older women in crisis, women discarded by the children they raised, ensuring no one else would be thrown away as easily as she had been. Eleanor made her first donation to the fund, $50,000. She didn't tell Calvin about the will. 2 months later, he asked Vivian for a copy of the estate plan. Vivian informed him, with a slight smile, that he was not included. He called Eleanor that night, his voice strained.
Mom.
Is this real? You're cutting me out completely? No, Eleanor corrected him. You did that all by yourself years ago when you signed me away like luggage and sold my things before I was even cold. She paused. You didn't just fail me. You erased me. And now you're learning what that feels like.
I was sorry, he said.
I said I forgave you, Eleanor replied, but forgiveness doesn't mean inheritance. She hung up. It was the last conversation they ever had. A month later, Calvin moved out quietly. There was no fanfare, no U-Haul, just a faded for sale sign that eventually came down. Eleanor didn't know where he went, and she didn't need to. The day he left, she sat on her porch, looked out at the quiet street, and felt nothing but profound peace. Lucas sat beside her with 2 muffins.
He's gone, he said.
Eleanor nodded. Sometimes people leave when they realize they can't control the narrative anymore. You think he'll ever try to come back? Maybe, Eleanor said, looking out at the blooming roses. But if he does, he'll find a fence that wasn't there before. Later that year, Eleanor was invited to speak at the community center's Elder Justice Seminar. Standing before a crowd of mostly older women, she told them her truth. They will call you old, she warned. They will call you a burden. They will smile while stealing the life you built. But let me tell you something. There is power in the truth. There is power in silence. And there is power in the law if you're brave enough to use it. Afterward, one woman hugged her tightly. Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy, she whispered. Eleanor went home that night, realizing her smaller house was not a step down, but a step into freedom. As Lucas set the table, she knew she wasn't at the end of her life. She was finally at the beginning. They had sent her to a nursing home and called her a burden, but in the end, Eleanor Vance gave them a burden they would never shake.